When you're trying to create a highly polished illustration, something that has a high level of detail, that you're really sort of refining everything, something that is like a cover quality illustration, one of the biggest challenges is figuring out how to kind of get all your sketches, your ideas, the rough stuff, and really kind of turn it into a highly polished drawing. Often the trick here is in between, what I call the construction phase. The construction phase is where you're allowed to play, to experiment. It's where you take your idea and we prepare our drawing for our finished lines. We look at how to construct all the anatomy, lay down your primary forms, think about perspective, form drawing, all of the things that really go into creating a solid drawing. Or if you're not into really solid drawings, if your style's more whimsical, this is where you get to refine, to experiment, to erase. I really built a lot of my core skills in the construction phase, drawing comics day in, day out. When I had to do my sort of pencil sketches and, sort of prepare for the finished lines, be drawing the muscles or getting reps on all these sort of basic drawing things. I think if you approach things this way with your process, you develop a good construction phase in there. It allows you to kind of experiment and learn and play and have fun learning to draw while you're actually creating finished illustrations. The construction phase is actually a massive secret weapon. It is, however, something that people often skip over entirely. It's one of the process steps that I think often beginners just sort of completely try and skip because often we want to see, oh, here's a nice little loose sketch, and like, here's my sort of fancy finished illustration. And, the stuff in the middle is where the rubber hits the road. That's where you actually get most of the action happening. That's where the image is won or lost. So in this video, which is actually part 2 of a multi-part tutorial series, I'm going to look at the construction phase. I'm going to show you how I take what we did in part 1, where we created some color thumbnails. I'm going to show you how I create a much more fleshed out drawing from that and really sort of prepare that rough blobby idea we had for a finished illustration. We're going to look at how to construct the sort of anatomy, the drapery, looking at, where the horizon line is, doing solid drawing, and really sort of refining things, dialing things in, figuring out the background, the middle ground, the foreground, drawing a lot of sort of blobby trees and, kind of really figuring out, how this illustration is going to work. As usual for a Drawing Codex video, this is not going to be heavily edited nor fast paced. This is a real-time, fully narrated tutorial. It's just going to be you and me in Photoshop, but I'm going to show you how this actually happens. Again, this step is often one that's completely skipped by people in the beginning, but I think it's so important to understand the value here. So this is where, again, I just want to show you the pace that we go. Sometimes this does take a while, but again, this is really where all of the magic happens. So hopefully that sounds interesting. Hopefully you'll join me. Let's jump in and get started. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name is Tim McBurney. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel, we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Now, if you'd like to learn more about line and color illustration, you can check out my free quick start guide. It's aimed to get you up and running quickly in Photoshop, developing your own simple, reliable line and color process and style. You'll get access to all of the brushes and Photoshop documents and tricks and tips that I use as I create the illustration in this guide. It's free. The link will be in the description, so go check that out if that's something you're interested in. So to move to the next stage, we essentially need to do a construction drawing. And we'll look at specifically how we can use this plan that we've created to really think about both what is going to be on what layer in the finished image, and how we can obviously now see that separating out some of these elements and constructing some of the secondary sort of forms that I've created here, like these tree limbs and little branches and all of the flowers, and also the different layers of color. So you can see here, if we sort of zoom up, I've kind of done this blobby painting, and I've just been essentially throwing stuff against the wall, messing around. But this does give me an idea for the fact that maybe some of these elements here should be separated from some of these elements in the back, and that will give us some nice overlap, and that we are going to want to have some busyness here where we have, background foliage again on the layer behind it that's kind of separated from this. So I'm kind of thinking about how many layers there need to be, the fact that these different elements are going to be different colors, and that gives me a reason to actually draw them separately, as opposed to just kind of suggesting things and kind of blobbily kind of just drawing stuff, right? It would be possible to kind of make all of this one blobby sort of sketchy mess, and that might work if we were doing something a little bit less detailed. But here we want to put the next level of polish here, and that is going to actually come by drawing a lot of things. The coloring process here is going to be very, very, very simple. It's just going to be flat color. So yeah, let's look at how to do that. But first, I do want to just go back to an idea here with these color roughs and looking at how the colors that you choose are going to be affected not just by the image itself, but also the things that surround it. And in this case, we could look at the typography. So I've kind of mocked this up as a cover, just because that's kind of something that I like to do. It gives the drawing some functionality. And I always kind of like combining text with the images. I often kind of find it just kind of is something that I like doing, because I do a lot of that when I am actually drawing comic book covers. So I just kind of made up this thing. It's kind of, I guess it's sort of related to sort of other graphic novels that I've created, but I've just sort of said The League of Witches, and this is like the first book, right? Just for fun. But what you might find is that if we modify the tonality, the color of that logo, that will affect how we want to sort of play with the color underneath. Now, what you can see initially is that if I kind of have this vibe, I'm going to want to leave a lot of the colors behind the logo to be lighter, so that it pops. And at least here, what I want to do is create a very sort of light background so that we can get some contrast there. I would probably go in and carve out some lighter tones at the bottom as well. And I would probably try and manipulate what is behind my little sort of signature thing there. These are things that I tend to do, and it makes the finished cover look a lot more polished if you consider all the elements that are going to be there. And it almost makes it so that the logo and the typography are sort of meshing with the art in an interesting way. So what that means is that this cover would not work that well without the typography there, right? Which is what you want. But that is an interesting point. But as I said, if we kind of don't, if we kind of have like dark on dark, it kind of works. But what you notice is that this background gets very lost, right? So if we have this, we have a nice fresh separation between the sort of little triangle of sky or sort of lighter background that's there behind her. And that has a lot of sort of pop, right? It gives us some directionality. It also vibrates with the idea of all the typography, kind of having a busyness to it that is mirrored in the art. So it just kind of works. When we sort of do this, we lose a lot of that contrast in the background, between the trees and the background. And again, that isn't going to work in many cases. But if we do brighten up the text, you can see that now that typography really sort of pops. And what you're always trying to do is just make sure you do have that contrast. So for instance here, if we just kind of play around with the tonality of that logo, you can kind of see that depending on the tonality of the background, right, I can get sort of different effects, and some of these might be interesting, some of these are going to be more readable than others, right? It's it's really just going to be a matter of fine-tuning all of these things as one. And that's exactly what I do when I'm creating this. I make sure that every element that I can change, sometimes the logo color can't be changed because it's on brand, but if I can change the typography, if I can manipulate things, then I will. Again, putting a little bit of this same blue that would be in the cape, I'm going to change the typography here to match that, so that again it feels like it's kind of part of the same image. And again, I'll sort of take some of this orange from the bird and I'll put that on my sort of signature there. Need to use my 2024 signature. That one is out of date. So yeah, just worth mentioning that you may want to create an image that probably, if it didn't have the typography on it, it would have a very low-key sort of void at the top of it that, you know, is going to look empty, but then when you put the typography on that, it's perfect. So it's always a matter of context and what you're trying to achieve there. So yeah, anyway, I just thought I'd mention that because I think often that is something that gets a little bit lost. Yeah, and here we got a good example of the different, let's see if we can get that, all right, good example here of the different sort of options we had. So this is the one I sort of ended up going with. This is the sort of first preliminary version that we played around with, and here were some of the different options there that we were experimenting with. And I do think it's good to have a point at which you're really messing around with the color, as I was, and then once you have sort of refined it, I think that's when it's good to go in and do a lot of this secondary stuff. All right, now I've got this in its own little file, and I kind of have this here again just for sort of teaching purposes, but it will be good to refer back to this because these are all flat colors. I haven't added a lot of fanciness to it, so it'll be actually very easy for me to drop these exact colors from here on my rough and put them onto my finished drawing. We just need to have a finished drawing. So we're going to consider a couple of things here. Oh, let's go over here. So I'll keep this one open. But here, all I'm really going to do, let's just merge all this down to try and keep our file size somewhat limited. So I've got some of the typography elements here. I'm just going to put all of that in a group, Control G. All right, get rid of that. And so that's kind of what it would look like. Oh, Photoshop's freaking out. That's kind of what it would look like. And what I might do is I will create a second version of this that I can put on a monitor above. There we go. So you can see, like, hey, look, it kind of works, right, without the text, right? I think it will still be an interesting image, but you know, and it's worthwhile making sure that, look, maybe it'll work okay, but primarily it's going to work like this. So there's a couple of things that are just worth mentioning as well before we go on, like what's happening with this file, because I kind of was rushing through the initial bit, so we get to the fun bit, which is playing around with colors. But what I have here is a cover template. This template is the same template that I use for the comic books that I create, and the proportions of the page are just the same as would be there on the comic book pages that I'm using. So this will actually work within the context of the book on my other comic book page templates. What you're seeing here around the edge is just an indication of bleed. So with a cover or a big image, typically you want to leave quite a bit of bleed along the edge, because that way they can wrap it around the cover. So if you look at sort of any, see if I can find something here, right? So here's a good example. Just go, see if, there we go. So you can see that with most covers, right, you have the art, and then it's going to wrap around on the edge, and all that is just printed on a very, you know, much sort of larger bit of paper, and it's wrapping around. So you would call this bleed. You could call it, you know, a variety of things, but essentially it's always good to have a little bit of extra space. That way it's easier to recompose if you need to change the angle or whatever, the ratio of the page or whatever. I like to have on cover images or anything that's kind of like one of these big things, I like to have quite a bit of extra bleed there. It is generally going to be always helpful. It means you've got plenty of extra room. You could probably even have more than this, to be honest. All right. So that's kind of what you're seeing. And all that we get here is just a black border that has slightly lower opacity. And I just turn this on and off. And that way I can kind of see the art, and then I can see it with the stuff on it. Now, what are we going to do from a construction point of view? Well, there's a couple of tasks here that we need to do, and this hasn't got to do with color, but I want to relate it to the process that we use, as I was saying, when we deal with color. So the technique that I'm using is very basic. I'm essentially putting a bit of paper, right, almost like a light box or something like that, just a white layer, lower opacity, and this just kind of allows me to draw on top. Now, the question is, when it comes to this, how much of this extra construction do I need to do? Like, what do I need to do to go to the next stage? There's probably, this is where you really have to think about how much fidelity you need. And I think often we consider the fidelity when it comes to anatomy, as I was saying, but I think it's also really worth considering fidelity in relation to just the level of detail you have on the image and how much we need. So I always like to think of process, and this is exactly what I teach in all of the courses that I do, like the Line and Color Academy, or any of the materials you've kind of seen me sort of create. We want to start with the finish. That means that we need to consider the level of detail, the fidelity that we are going to need, and where we're going. And then what we do is we build structure underneath that. Now, if this was maybe just a quick image that I was creating for fun, then maybe I don't need to, maybe I could just use this. I could probably just go from this and create finished lines and it would be okay. But if we're looking for that sort of cover level of detail, or I want to add a little bit more, this is where you have to think about what your options are. And if we sort of start with the finish and then we say, well, what do I need in order to get to that finish? How much structure? How much structure do I need to get to the level of finish that I need? And that's what we're sort of dealing with now. And also to build good structure and to really feel like it's worthwhile building structure, and to have a concept of like, oh, okay, yes, here I'm going to be building some of these branches, right? And I'm going to be building some of these flowers here. In order to realize and get an idea for like how to actually build structure. So for instance, if I just have like some rough foliage, and a lot of the images that I would create would just have like sort of rough foliage. If I just have rough foliage, then I kind of can't add too much structure to it. There's not actually enough there for me to do anything with. I could draw a million leaves, right? I could really work the leaves, but it's just boring, right? It's just a lot of stuff. So to get to a high level of finish, I need to add structure, I need to construct. And in order to construct, I need to know what I'm constructing, and I need to have a plan for what I'm constructing. And that's really what we have been doing. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, let me know in the comments down below whether that kind of tracks, but I think this is a major thing to consider. You need to always know where you're going with your art, what level of polish you're aiming for. And this is why often people trip up in the beginning, because they're kind of just doing sketches. You do something and then it's sort of turning out well, so you keep working it up. And often if you haven't really planned the level of fidelity, if you haven't added the structure, just kind of working it up and trying to get to a high level of finish doesn't always work. You often need to really build in a way that you're going to add detail. Otherwise, you just have to sit there rendering a million leaves, which is not necessarily fun, or it's actually a lot harder to do that than it would be to create a nice little sort of symphony of branches, overlapping lighter leaves that are overlapping darker leaves. And we, have some things that are going to create and pull contrast. These little, I don't know exactly what we're going to have up here in the tree, because you probably want to make these leaves sort of different to these ones. These flowers different to these. So again, these are all the ideas that we need to consider as we're doing this. So that's what I'm thinking about, is like, how detailed do we need to be? But I do have a drawing here, and I also don't need to just redo it all. I don't need to, because I'll still be able to, for instance, right, if I sort of really go in here and refine a lot of this structure, right, we really kind of figure out what's going on with this face. If I then create another sort of version of this, and I do my finished lines over the top of this, right? So if you imagine now, I'm going to be like, oh, okay, yep, let's nail that. I can still see all of the stuff. So I'm going to be able to see the combination of the initial sketch, the corrections I make to it, and I'm going to be able to create my finished lines based on both of those things, or a mix. So this is where another key thing that I'm always trying to teach is that you need to figure out where you're going, as we were saying, what is the finish, and what is your ability to draw things or ink things or create finished drawings. So we'll just sort of start this. What is your ability to wing it? And in the beginning, your ability to wing it, and this also goes for color. In the beginning, your ability to wing it is probably fairly limited. So often you see professional artists who have been working for, decades. I've been doing this for decades, and it's, as I said, even on some covers, what I'll do is I'll do a very rough little sort of sketch, right, similar to what you're seeing here with the initial color rough, and then I'll just go to final over that, because I know, look, there's nothing in there that I really have to figure out. But when it comes to process and learning, what I'm always going on about is expanding your construction phase. And the construction phase is exactly what I'm doing here. And what we're doing by expanding the construction phase is we're allowing ourselves a step so that if we have bitten off more than we can chew, right? If you have gone in and created a really nice thumbnail, but then you've kind of maybe sort of made it have a particular anatomical feature that you don't know how to draw, or I've just kind of put the arm up in a particular way, and I'm not quite sure how to draw it from that angle. You need a place for you to figure that out. And this is where a lot of the other stuff that I'm normally posting on the Drawing Codex channel in terms of constructive anatomy, following our Loomis method, etc., will really, really help. But it's also important to understand that, constructive anatomy is just a skill, and it's a way of sort of understanding and breaking down the form. And the more you sort of get better at that, the better you get at just refining your drawings in general. But really, all this comes down to is just you refining your drawing and really understanding what is meant to go where. That's really all you have to worry about. What goes where, and how do we refine these lines? So you can get really good by constructive anatomy study, really figuring out what goes where, and that's how I tend to approach things. But also, if you just do thousands and thousands of these drawings and give yourself the opportunity to experiment, redraw, you will also get better that way. I think that's important to appreciate. And some things are going to be very structural, but a lot of people have very abstract styles, right? Where it's not always about structure. It's not always about making everything, sort of tight and three-dimensional. Often you can have very, very effective, amazing art that's very evocative, that doesn't have style. But we still need to do a construction phase. We still need to have a phase where what you're doing is allowing yourself to fail. And that really is the key of construction. So when we're doing construction, we don't just necessarily need to worry about like boxes and all that stuff. You're also just allowing yourself a time of the drawing where you can fail, you can erase, but you kind of know where you're going. You know the outcome you need, you know the emotion that you need, and you can spend, and you should spend, as much time as possible at this stage in the beginning. This is where you can actually learn to draw by drawing cool things that you actually like. And this is where, again, a big part of the ethos of the Line and Color Academy, the courses that I run, the stuff that I sort of talk about on YouTube, is all about trying to learn to draw interesting things from imagination while we're actually drawing fun things that we like. So, and the way that I think that functions the best, again, is to expand the construction phase and really make sure that you get comfortable living here. But this can be, as I said, just a matter of giving yourself an opportunity to redraw the face, right? To redraw some of these lines a million times, right? There's no right or wrong way to do this. I really believe in the ideas of constructive anatomy, like the Loomis method. That tends to work quite well for the, sort of outcomes that I'm interested in, making things structural. I think it sort of really helps me. But, I know a lot of people who just, they just kind of get good by drawing things and practicing and messing around. So trying to find some flow to this hair. And again, we'll have some, let's think about what's happening with these earrings. Boom. All right. And she's got this sort of weird epic headpiece up here. Whoop. Rotate that a bit. Yeah, let's just make sure we're all right. We've got a bit of this structure here. So again, let's dive a little bit into some of the construction stuff, because again, like, yes, you can just get good at drawing stuff, right? Like, so you can see here, I haven't really done any construction for the arm, but the sketch that I did was proportionally okay. Doing larger thumbnails does help you, if your drawing is at a good enough level, to nail the proportion earlier on. If you're drawing really small, it's very easy to accidentally draw an arm a little bit too big or a little bit too small. Once you get it drawing a little bit bigger and you're just drawing loosely, it can be a little bit easier to kind of nail that on the right time, on the first go. I feel like probably the best thing to do is just to start that again, but I'm just going to use the Photoshop cheats. So let's look at a couple of things that have been sorted out in this drawing, right? One of them is just to think about where our horizon line is. So you don't need to do, you don't need to be 100% into, crazy perspective or anything like that. But even when my perspective was not that good, I really made sure I knew where the horizon line is. I think it's one of the most important things. And that just means, like, where are we kind of looking at this character from, right? So our eye level is kind of here. And that means that, right, if we look at some of these lines there, let's get good rotation. Boom. That this line across here is straight, and here, if we're kind of looking at the character almost from a little bit of an angle like this. If we imagine they're kind of stuck on a if they're sort of painted on a door or something like that, right? We're kind of looking at the door, right, a little bit from the side. So all the lines that are parallel to the character are going to follow, right, this basic idea. So if we were to imagine that door, right, again, we sort of got a door, boom, 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 like this. And that's essentially what we're trying to do. Now, you don't need to know a lot about the ins and outs of why these perspective grid works, or the details of measuring points and 1 point, 2 point, 3 point technical perspective and drawing plans and all that kind of stuff. That stuff's helped me a lot, but when you're looking at construction, just doing some very simple stuff like this will help a lot. And all this says is like, okay, above here, right? So if I need to line something up, for instance, right, I've got her ears, right? Going to line them up over here. If I'm going to line up the eyes, right, they're going to go on this angle. This would change if her head was tilted, but she's sort of more or less facing there. Again, if we look at the bottom of the breast, so where are they going? I need them to line up here. Right, but let's look at the knees. Again, the knees, even though this hip is down, so this knee is going to be even lower. Again, we're at this kind of level. And if we were to look at when we come to draw this, this will kind of help us even more. So this is worthwhile understanding. So same thing here. All right, and this, I didn't draw that very accurately after all that. But yeah, so I'm kind of thinking about like, well, okay, where's the center? I've got center of there, boom. Let's see if we can draw through. This is the other major constructive anatomy concept that we pay attention to, right? Which is like, how do I find the actual starting and stopping of different points? Well, again, I'm going to trace up and sort of imagine where this thing is maybe sort of sticking on her head. I don't know how it is sticking there or what's going on. But yeah, I'll find the center of it there, and I'm imagining it without the hair in front. Boom, boom, boom. And then, yeah, then I'm doing... This is where, again, more technical drawing will actually kind of help you, being able to visualize how we would sort of mirror and, right, think about, you know, how to figure out where some of these other lines are going. But in many cases, you can just eyeball it, right? You know, it's not gonna matter that much for this type of drawing. But the more you understand about technical drawing, you know, like things like how to draw cars or boats or planes, it will actually help you quite a bit when it comes to doing this type of drawing. Because again, we always have little elements. Same thing here, thinking about where is the center line and where are these earrings. Right, let's make sure all of that stuff lines up. Right, again, I've got the center line of her body, and I can make sure when we've got this sort of elliptical thing there that I put it in. So this is where, again, I'm playing with construction. I'm using it where I need it. And in some places, we don't need it. And yeah, I find it's a good thing to go through the drawing and really kind of figure out the basic anatomy first, then move on to, you know, clothing the figure. That's typically a really sort of good way to go. Again, I'm thinking about the mass of some of this hair, right, where it's sitting on the form. So we can see this lump of hair kind of comes down there, and it's good for me to probably think about how it's going to curve over the shoulder here a little bit. And also let's come over here and think, let's look at the negative space there. So this hair is kind of coming over here. I can see there's a space between this and the pendant, right? And yeah, I can kind of put in something that maybe that kind of feels like it's sort of the same. So again, I can figure out some of this stuff at the finished line stage. All right, let's look there. I feel like this, so this is where it's good to double check. All right, let's look at the lines going here. And I can see there that that ear is starting to drift up. So let's put it in there and just really make sure it's kind of a bit lower. And so it's always good to zoom out, right? Check your perspective from different angles. The other thing that's worthwhile doing is trying to put in the face, put in the eyes. It's probably a lot better to put in the eyes earlier than I have here, because often we need to readjust the face after we kind of put in the sockets. Now I'll probably come back and do another pass on the face. Really kind of true it up a little bit. But for now, I think that'll be fine. Let's move on. Again, think about proportionally what's happening here. So I have a rough, although this is kind of evened out, I did have this going up this way a little bit. So this shoulder is higher than this shoulder. And I want to sort of play that up here where this is lower than this. So that means we need to think about, again, where's the bottom of the pelvis going to be? I'm just going to sort of draw that center line and try and think about, okay, I've got this center line coming here. Right, center line coming here. And this one's just going to be a little bit off. And that means the hips are also going to be a little bit off. All right, so the top of the hip bone, boom, it's going to be a little bit off. Now we've got boom. Now again, would I draw all of these in if I was, you know, sort of trying to do this without making it a demo? Maybe not, but it will probably turn out better if I do. Again, we can see this is probably going to come out here. So there's quite a nice kind of line to the sketch that I had that was sort of flowy, and I do want to kind of keep that a little bit. All right, and all of this is going to be covered, but it's good to figure out all of your anatomy, figure out where it is. You never know when it's really going to come in handy to know where some of those things are. But I do need to be careful that I don't, and this is often where, again, people can get into real trouble, because it's easy to put in a lot of these marks that aren't going to be seen. And I want to kind of focus on the lines here that are more likely to be seen. Oh. So yeah, think about that. And once I've sort of got those hips there, again, I should probably flip this drawing. I feel like if I flip it, this is not going to work. But let's put that in. All right, so we sort of got that kind of stomach there. That's probably going to be a little bit higher, maybe. Yeah, something like that. Well, and this is where, now I've got those hips, I can kind of think about where probably a logical belt line would be. And then I can put in some of these other bits and pieces that we had there. Now, in the beginning, it can be really useful to do some of these different steps on different layers. And I think that can help a lot, because the more you do this construction on separate layers, the easier it is to, say, oh, I messed up the clothes, but I can just delete that and go back and sort of tweak the anatomy, or vice versa, as opposed to having to erase everything, which is kind of annoying. Also, this is precisely the point at which, if you are doing construction drawing and you haven't done a lot of this, especially if you're drawing something like a car, you will start to get lost. So this thing where we're drawing through, everyone always will suggest you draw through. The problem with drawing through is that it quickly becomes very complicated. You have a million lines everywhere. There's all sorts of different colors and bits everywhere. It's very confusing. So the key to remember is that everyone is kind of confused by this. We just get better at checking where everything is. But also keep in mind now and see how I'm able to use some of these big strokes that I've made to, think about adding a few other little bits and pieces, right? I'm like, I don't know what these are going to be, but I've sort of got these little, maybe they're sort of little charms, or maybe they're some kind of adornment, right? But I've got these little things that are going to be red. Now again, I'm not going to draw these in any crazy detail, but because I've thought about the color theory and I've said, oh, we need a few little bits of red here, I'm now adding this, right? Now this is the same. Same with this. Got a little pouch and I'm going to make it red. Now, did we have something? I think we had something over here, but I'm just going to keep that see if I can keep that pretty clean. Keep this line clean. Got this going over here, going over there, and I think I also had, I think I also had a little bit of some kind of thing tucked into the belt line over there. Anyway, that's probably enough. We'll create a little bit of a pattern here to remind ourselves to add something there. But again, we're getting a little bit chaotic with the drawing, so maybe I'll have to forget about that. Cool. So, like the hip area is probably one of those areas that's going to be the most sort of tricky to draw in this instance. And the real trick here is, as I'm sort of zoomed up, I'm checking on my other monitor to see the smaller version of it, right? Which is going to sort of show me, like, does this look like it's making sense? The other thing I'm doing is, that one is not tilted. So it's very easy to get lost here when you're drawing at this scale, zoomed up at an angle, and then forget where you are and draw something that doesn't make sense. So you either have to zoom out or check it on another monitor. But having a good proportional breakdown in the beginning will save a huge amount of fuss, which is why, again, the constructive anatomy sort of technique, if you are wanting to make things look somewhat structural, I think really does help. Because you get better at roughing it in correctly. All right. So I'm going to have a lot of this foot covered, so I don't really need to worry about it too much. But I am just going to try and think about what is going to be on here. Are we going to have anything on here? Maybe. And here. So this knee would line up in like here, but remember this is down. The hip is down, so this knee is going to be a little bit lower. And where does it fall? Here? Yeah, I mean, let's rough it in, right? It's probably going to be something like that. But I also think that that's going to be covered by this, so we don't need to worry about it too much. Now it's not clear to me exactly what is going on up here with this. Like how does this actually turn into this is still a little bit vague, a little bit like I'm not sure whether this is actually going to work. We'll have to find out. Oh. Yeah, we'll see. Because again, it's not quite as clean. Alright, this goes down here. And again, we will rough it up a little bit. I think making it a little bit haggard is a good idea. Boom. And we also had the idea that maybe, and this might be good to kind of show here. This is kind of coming around. And that there is also like a kind of skirt thing behind here. Right, multiple layers. All right. So hopefully that makes sense, right? Hopefully you can kind of see how we're adding that construction. And the construction is always a matter of like how much effort you put into it is a function of how much you need to learn about this particular drawing, how much you want to experiment and play in general. So it may be that you're already good at drawing, but this pose that you're doing right now is something that's new. In that case, lots of construction drawing. It may be that you already know this pose, this is quite good, but you want to work on your anatomy to the next level. Let's put in all those muscles. Let's really go to the nth degree. Let's almost make this an anatomy study. But we do it here, and then instead of just doing random anatomy studies in our sketchbook, right, I'm going to do random anatomy studies here, and I'm going to figure out like, okay, where are all the different muscles of the deltoid? Let's connect them all up. All right, let's understand like where the rib cage is, where the spine is. Let's find the actual bone. Right, let's find the insertion points. Let's trace that bicep up and figure out where does it actually insert. Let's do all that. But then you get to do a finished drawing over it and see how your anatomical knowledge actually stacks up. That, I think, is the most important thing to understand when we're trying to learn through doing illustration, is we're not just having a go and sort of failing. We're giving ourselves lots and lots of opportunity to learn through the illustrations that we're doing. And the other thing is that if you build these skills, these parlay directly into you being able to, create highly polished illustration, because often these things that we're doing here are what I would do, certainly if I was working on a really sort of detailed cover illustration or something. As I'd figure out all the musculature, I'd get all of that working. Where's the center line? Okay, we're going to draw breasts. Let's make sure they're evenly distributed across the center line. We got the right weight there. We're sort of constructing the different sort of parts of the breast, right? Making sure they hang properly, etc., etc. And the more you do that stuff, the more you learn. And I think in general, this is a much more effective way to learn than just doing sort of random anatomy studies in a sketchbook. This is what I have found at any rate. Okay, so that's the second bits of anatomy we need to figure out. What else we got? So let's have a go at this face. So another thing you can always do that I often do is let's hold down Alt, or however you would do it in your program. I just drag. So Alt drag, it just duplicates the layer, and then I just hide the one underneath. And that means, I'm going to go in here and let's have another go at this face. All right, let's sort of zoom up, see if I can get a real read on it. I'm going to go from 35. We'll go down a little bit in terms of brush size. All right, let's see if I can add a little bit of structure here. Now I know I'm looking up at the nose, and I'm only after like one little line or two here, but adding the structure in the beginning allows me to really see what's going on. All right, so I'm going to mark some points in from the nose to kind of start the eye. Think about where those are. Think about where the bottom of that eye is going to go. Again, I'm going for pretty stylized kind of look. Again, I haven't really thought about should she be kind of looking at us? What should she be doing? I got to remember if you remember where horizon line is, we're a little bit lower, so we are sort of down. So I think it's going to feel more like she's actually looking if we put those eyes looking down. We could also put it so they're looking that way. Again, hard to say. This is where, doing some light erasing. Right, going in there, really figuring out exactly what our lines are going to be might work. Or you could just try and wing it right at the end. Right? There's no right or wrong here. But it is easy to get stuck here. Getting a little bit fixated on the structure and exactly what's going on. Good to flip it here. Let's flip the canvas. See if we're still somewhat on track. And this is where, again, having that construction phase to really be able to trace everything. I feel like we need to move some of this kind of in a little bit and just give ourselves a bit more room here. So again, drawing through, even though it's not really going to help, but all of these little ideas help a bit. Another thing we had here was a little sort of fantasy gemstone tiara-y thing. So I need to put that in. All right. Make sure that is kind of working. Make sure we've got some visual complexity with this hair. So kind of, yeah, thinking about the shapes. Looking, yeah, I think I need a bit more mass to it now that I've made that head a bit bigger. But this is quite tricky also to really figure out, because frequently when you're in a construction phase, we have a difficulty seeing what is actually going on. So that can be a massive challenge as well. But yeah, trying to create some good overlaps. And I think the real key is, what do we do? What do we do here? Because it's all about the silhouette. Yeah, I think we just need a bit more of that structure, a bit more complexity. But you can see, yeah, you know, like this is getting messy, right? We really need to go in there and figure out, you know, like what is over what is under what. It might be worth, you know, saving that till the end, but and again, like do I need to add more complexity to this thing? Do I need to think about, like, okay, that's where the center is. Like, again, maybe I do need to, maybe we need to take some of this hair off here so that it really feels like it's kind of centered. Yeah, not sure. And that could also be that, again, I've kind of constructed this, and a lot of the shapes initially were working maybe when the character's face was a little bit more pushed and facing us, whereas now the character's face is tilted, and that kind of changes everything. So this is where, again, the shapes you create initially, if you kind of haven't figured it out, we often need to go in there and really kind of refine it. And these often are the things we're refining. You know, it's less about our structural refinement. It's more just a matter of, you know, let's refine this drawing so it kind of looks good, right? Oh. Yeah, so add some structure here. And again, also good to make sure that we add structure to things like lips, right? So it's good to draw more there than maybe you will actually draw with the finished lines. So I might not actually put in this much actual line work when I'm doing the finished set of lines, but putting it in there initially is going to help. Okay, how is this going? How does this look overall? Let's flip it, because the problem with flipping it is, yeah, you sort of get it looking good from one angle, and then we flip it, and it's like, oh no, it's not working. All right, I'm going to save that version by just dragging up and holding Alt, and I kind of just have this feeling that maybe the face itself is a bit big. let's see if I can. Is it gonna let me? Yeah, just a tiny bit bigger, tiny bit smaller, sorry. Oh, come on. Yeah, just playing around, just very kind of subtle. So people often like doing this with the warp tool as well these days. That seems to be a much more sort of easier way to do it. I think so many of the techniques that I use for Photoshop trickery were developed pre-warp tool and stuff, so I'm just used to kind of selecting little things, moving them around, but warp tool does work for that. So if we kind of go back, right? Yeah, I feel like this is working a little bit better. I feel like that the expression is not that interesting at the moment. But who knows? I think that might do. So, all right, and you can see again, you know, this stuff does take a while, right? It takes a while to get the construction going, but probably relatively speaking, relative to the amount of time we're going to take in general, it's not that bad. We've been going on this for about an hour, and I'm sort of just chilling out. And I think we'll probably have to kind of speed things up, but this really is where we build all of the simplicity that is going to allow us to quickly color this and use the color plan that we've kind of already got. So let's think about this bird. Now, I normally have a couple of rules when it comes to looking for a reference here. I would normally try and do a 5-minute reference dive for a couple of things here. One would be the bird. The second would be the flowers in the trees, and the third would be the flowers in the sort of underbrush right down below, because I think they should look different, right? Obviously, flowers are different depending on how they grow, but I'm going to make them a similar color. So that's, again, something that might be worth doing. Or what I try and do is do a little kind of sketch, right? And kind of think about, like, maybe these flowers like this are right in the tree. They're kind of like hanging flowers. Maybe these ones down here are a little bit more, I kind of like the idea of them being like sort of tulips. So, often that's just a matter of, I think I did like a tiny little sort of sketch before about like what do we sort of want these to look like. Boom. And I think honestly, just doing something like this is going to be enough. But what we want to think about is the structure underlying this. This will kind of help us draw them. Right, so when we're thinking about this, the question is, right, if we think about it like a tulip, right, that's essentially this big cylindrical form. Right, and so what you might find is, like, I can construct a few of these, and I think I've got some interesting shapes here that might be good to kind of keep. Might be good to kind of keep some of these shapes. But if I can sort of figure out where the general structure of them are, I might not even need to do this, because I can probably do this type of drawing in the finish inks. But what we need to think about is, what is the reference we need? So I either need to draw it from Visual Library and think about it, be consistent, or I need to do what I like to call a 5-minute reference grab. And that's where what I do, and this is also something that is part of the sort of teaching and the general kind of system I use, is that we don't want to spend hours and hours on Pinterest. We want to get in, get out. You don't want to get sucked into these things. You'll end up, so we've been doing construction drawing here for a fairly detailed, cover level quality image, and we're about an hour in, probably about, half an hour or 40 minutes really in. You can easily spend half an hour messing around on Pinterest or whatever reference, sort of searching mechanism you like, and like half the time we're not going to get exactly what I want, because I'm sort of dealing with some kind of vague fantasy-esque sort of flower that doesn't exist. So it's not going to exist. I'm just looking for reference, right? So the question is, like, can I do it without reference? Like, can I think about, well, like, would this work? Is this so bad? Right? And the second thing is, if we do go to Pinterest, we want to get in and out of there. We want to be in and out, hit and run, right? Think about like you're robbing a bank. You do not want to stay there. Staying there is the end, right? That means you lose big time. So that's how I like to think about it. Now, what I often do also is say, well, I know that I can do that. I can go on the internet and I can go there and find some reference in 5 minutes. It's possible. Let's see what I can do without it, right? Like let's do some simple first principles construction. And I think this is where often people who are saying, so I'm going to try and I'll draw this bird, right? And I have no idea what type of bird it is. I'm going to make up the bird. It kind of has this sort of bird of paradise vibe, but again, it's fantastical. I've got some interesting shapes here. They are based off a general knowledge of birds, but I mean, I'm probably not going to draw the bird skeleton. But I think this is often where people, and I see a lot of, videos on sort of YouTube and, around the place, a lot of advice that's kind of talking about how you always need reference, and drawing's a lot better when you have reference. I think the thing that's often missing from that is really the obvious stuff, which is the skill set that is required to draw stuff without reference, which is where we think about primary, secondary, and tertiary form, and you actually learn how to draw without reference. If you don't know how to draw without reference and you're not used to constructing your forms and thinking about where the perspective is, then you're going to really struggle, obviously. But I think in a lot of cases it's a little bit disingenuous, because people are saying, hey, here's my drawing without reference, and it's not very good, and here it is with reference and it's good. But I don't see a lot of what you would do if you actually were to go and construct something properly from your imagination. So let's go and sort of do that and look at actually how you would do that. So the trick is, if people are kind of saying, like, and I think this is really important, and I don't want to sort of denigrate other people sort of giving advice and stuff like that, because I think everyone has very relative advice that is valuable depending on sort of where you're at, and often you need to hear different things. But often what I see when people are giving that advice is they don't really know how to construct stuff without reference, right? They don't have the skill set, and you can kind of see it based on their drawing. So let's sort of look at how we would sort of think our way through this. So we can sort of think of like a bird, right, from a primary form perspective, right? It's kind of a big old water balloon, right? We have this kind of, right? And if you actually kind of look at it, right, again, I always forget the exact sort of skeleton. Bird skeletons look really bad. But again, we don't need to go to skeleton level, right? Because we're not necessarily, right? We're not necessarily going there. But yeah, you kind of got like a bit here, water balloon, and then we're going to have a big old head there. And in this case, again, what kind of what do we got here? We got a beak. How could we make this beak interesting? Right, where's the eye? Eye is going to be again somewhere here. And again, we could leave it. It does have quite a distinct beak. But I could play around with that, right? Because if we go in, and we'll do this in a minute, and think about the structure, right? So this is a cartoony construction. This is not, photorealistic bird, but, essentially I've got here, right? I've got water balloon. Let's draw it. Let's draw it down here. Where do we draw it? I'm kind of out of space. Let's draw it up here. I got my water balloon. And then I've got a cylinder coming off it. And then I've got the head, right? And then I've got a cone. I know this seems like, I feel like often when you see this, it's like, yeah, shut up, because it's not that easy. But it's not that easy, but you have to practice this. If you want to sort of be able to draw from your imagination, you need to start thinking about how you construct these things and how you would build, your sort of primary forms, your secondary forms, and also again, how much detail do you need, right? So I'm looking at what my outcome is and saying, do I need reference for that? Can this be a cool fantasy bird? Can I lean into the shapes? Can I make this fun? Do I know enough structure to kind of get me going, right? That's the question. And yeah, I don't know about the legs here. I don't think that's going to work. But you know what? Good thing about birds is, right, we got these feathers that mostly are going to cover up the legs. And again, how much. Where you would probably fall down sort of drawing birds is typically where I fall down drawing birds, is where they've got their wings open, they're flying. You kind of need to see the specific pattern for how the feathers kind of play out. There's a lot of subtlety there that I'm going to miss because I know my outcome. This is just a sort of a shape-based kind of bird. It's just a fantasy bird. It doesn't exist. It's not flying, right? And so this is just a big sort of flat plane, right? So I got this, I got this thing as well, right? That's just flat. Okay, got an eye there. And this is where you can think about, okay, I've got a cone, right? Is it a big old toucan style, right? Beak, is it like this? Right, can we give it a little bit of a smile? You can also just do some basic, right? That's our basic form, that's our primary form. Let's add some tertiary form. Sorry, let's add some secondary form. Let's see if we, right, make it a slightly different shape. So you can obviously just play around with it, have fun. Is it pointy? Right? You could maybe give it, you could do whatever you want because I'm not worried about reference, right? I could give it some little sort of orc teeth. That might be cool. Right? Some little bird tusks. Probably haven't seen that before. That's a stupid idea. But anyway, might be fun. Anyway, you get the idea. We need to think about primary, right? Secondary, and in this case, there really isn't much tertiary form. Tertiary form would be like, the texture, like the specific way that each feather kind of plays out, etc., etc. Boom. Boom. Right, so here I've got my kind of, right, the chest of the bird is coming out here. And yeah, I've kind of got like a million tail feathers that don't necessarily make any sense because we've also got, right, this big tail feather, but I'm just going to imagine that, like a lot of these are just for fun or whatever, right? Again, it's just fantasy. It's just for fun. And often, that, look, I know that there are a bunch of weird birds of paradise out there. anything is possible. There is some weird looking birds, so my weird bird is going to be okay. But yeah, a lot of this is dependent on, like exactly what you're doing. I'm doing this for myself. I'm not having to match reference. If it's a particular type of bird, I'm obviously going to get plenty of reference for that particular bird. Have to nail that. But I think often the thing is to understand that part of the benefit that we have when we're working in styles like this, anything that's not hyper realistic, really, you can play around. You can have fun. I can draw. We can make this thing. I can make it whatever shape I want. I don't need reference. Yeah. So anyway, hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if that tracks, and let me know what your thoughts are on the sort of reference versus not reference. I know this is one of the things that I get the most kind of questions on, and I think it's a super important sort of concept to understand. But there are techniques for learning to draw from your imagination without reference. Yes, it does involve building visual library, but primarily it's about understanding good form drawing, good construction drawing, good drawing principles, and having a process for how you do it. Thinking about the general forms and structures. So you don't need to know, for instance, all anatomy, but most quadruped anatomy is pretty similar, right? Most monsters are based off sort of biped anatomy, like humans. Quadrupeds would be like horses, cats, or whatever. The proportions are different, but the basic structure is the same. They're very, very, very similar. And the same with sort of birds, right? All birds are going to have very almost identical anatomy and the way they kind of work. It's just a matter of different things having different proportions, and often, it's like feathers and things that kind of come off and give things very particular looks. Like an owl is a good example, right? It's a weird looking thing, but underneath it's just a bird. Anyway, let me know if that makes sense. But yeah, these are the kind of things we really need to pay attention to. Draw with form, have a system, primary, secondary, tertiary forms. Think it through, draw through, where all these things. If you build this skill, then you too can draw, weird birds from your imagination, and they're not going to be 100% accurate, but you can have fun with it, right? And again, hopefully it'll be kind of interesting at any rate. We'll see if this works in the end once we kind of ink it. All right, so I'm just going to, I think these were fun, but I'm just going to put them somewhere because I'm going to need that space. Actually, and I'll do the same with this. All right, let's get rid of that. So I'm just going to take these layers and we'll put them down here. Right, again, let's duplicate that. This also means that, I also like duplicating it because I can sort of go back and see the progress for it. Yeah, cool. All right. So I think like that's a good sort of stage that I would kind of, be trying to get to, is like having the figure kind of all roughed out. We've done our construction. Again, we probably spent about an hour to get to this point. The next thing I need to do, though, is to look at the background and constructing that. Just quickly before we do that, though, I do want to just check. There's a couple of things here, drawing-wise, that I think are worth looking at. One is that we probably could move this tail here a little bit. I think that might feel slightly better, but I will sort of rotate it down so it's kind of pointing in the same direction, taking up sort of the same amount of space, but maybe it's hard to say. No, maybe I'll leave it there. Again, it's not anatomically correct, but I think it kind of works. The other thing we could do is, I feel like, maybe shrink this head a little bit. I think that might be a good idea. It is looking just a tad big to me, which just kind of gives everything a slightly cartoony vibe. So I'm going to hide that and see whether just kind of shrinking the whole thing helps. Now this can be dangerous because then it's actually kind of shrinking the shoulders and doing a whole bunch of other stuff. So you do need to watch out when you do that. But I feel like just a little bit is a good idea. There we go. Boom. Yeah, I feel like that's a bit better. So I think it's still, everything still kind of stays in the same spot, but if we turn that off, right, smaller, bigger, smaller, yeah, I think smaller just feels a bit better. All right, so let's see. I'm going to do this on separate layer because, you know, when we're doing the background, no need to have to erase the character if I don't want to. And there's often wisdom in these weird shapes that we create here. So I'm creating weird blobs, and often, you know, look, these are just done randomly, but as a result, there is some nice randomness to them, to the kind of where they occur. I think that is often worthwhile appreciating. And here again, I'll sort of do a few of these a different way, and we'll kind of look at how this kind of helps us with the finish. That is to say, I'm going to create some of these flowers that I've got here. This one's kind of annoying, it's going through this. I might see if I can redo that. That's on the separate layer. Let's get rid of that. Yeah, so I kind of want to separate out this a little bit. All right, and see if we can protect that little signature thing a bit better. Again, it can just be a bit annoying, can take up a bit of time to, you know, make those things read the same thing here. Probably what I'll do is I'll move this kind of rock here. I'll move this over a little bit. Right, we've got some foliage here. And all of this I could probably just rough in at the sort of finish stage, right? So I'm just going to put in rough indications for what we need in particular areas. But I'll draw some of it out, as I said. Again, kind of thinking and drawing at the same time. I'll draw some of it out so you can kind of see the benefits of going through and drawing it out. And some of it we'll just go in there and kind of wing it and look at how we do that as well. So mostly here what we're after, or what I'm after, is watching these tangents. Right, so I got this bit of log here. See if we can put some moss or something like that there. And again, gonna have some foliage. foliage here that's going to be darker. So I've got my silhouette there, and then I'll have some foliage here that'll be lighter. This foliage will be darker. Same thing here, got a bit of grass coming up. Again, might be good to do some of this with some line. Add a bit of overlap here. This might get sort of tricky, but it'll also give us another opportunity to look at how we sort of color some of these other kind of areas, right? And how sort of detailed we get in different areas of the illustration. So what did I have here? I had these kind of hanging leaves. That was sort of my idea. I feel like this might fit with the shape language that we've got. So I'm trying to match the shape a little bit. With what we've got going here. And then also got to think about different layers of branches. So this is where we get this level of complexity. We just started by planning it with little blobs, right? Just blobbing, splotching here, splotching there. It seems very inconsequential, but now when I'm at the construction phase, this is where it's so important. I have a good conception of what's going to be light, what's going to be dark, where to think about placing the texture. I actually think probably that. Yeah, I'm going to stick really closely to my little plan. Right. Gives me some good insight. Whereas otherwise it's very hard when you're at this stage, right? Where we're just kind of drawing lines and it's going to get super busy. It's very hard to know, am I actually doing good work? Are the things that I'm doing actually having any impact on my image? But because I've got, as I said, a nice feeling of balance within the color, and I'm confident that, you know, I've got something there that's going to work, it's a lot easier for me to lean into this stage of the process. Just add some little bits. I've got overlap, right? Getting a good level of complexity. I'm not sure about some of these. Some of these might not need to. Again, it's a matter of like where are some of those, on what level are those branches? On what layer are they going to be? Maybe over here, if they're going up onto these ones. Then that will be alright. Again, a lot of this is probably going to get blasted down in detail, right? None of it's going to be really in focus. I mean, color-wise, it's very kind of desaturated and pushed back. But yeah, maybe if I build some foliage down here. It'll make sense to have this going here. But I do want to then, again, sort of cover up the roots of those trees with some idea of what's happening on the ground below. Now, exactly what is on what layer will actually be quite a challenge, and I think this is often one of the biggest real problems that we can run into with the line and color process, is that a lot of the sophistication we're going to get with this style of illustration is down to how we organize our layers and allow ourselves to put a bit of atmosphere between them to give a more sophisticated look. And it's a lot easier to do that if you have a good sense in the beginning of what is going to be on what layer. So this is where, even though this seems like, oh man, like this is not what I signed up for. I'm drawing a million leaves here. The reality is that drawing a million leaves is pretty easy and pretty fun if we kind of get it right. If we get it wrong and we then don't know what layer they're on, or there's not much complexity, or I don't have a good sense of what overlays what, then it becomes very tricky. And again, a good example of this is that, like here, got some very different sort of layers going on. And I don't just, like, I can't just have, so what this sort of says to me is that I'm going to have like quite a few different layers here in the background, because I'm going to have these flowers, but I also am going to want to have some foliage on that same, on that same layer. To make sure it's not just, flowers kind of stuck there on top of a tree. We want to kind of blend it in. So yeah, really thinking about what goes where, what's overlaying what, is half the battle with this particular style. Again, got some bigger leaves. We also want to leave a lot of sort of detail around here for the logo. And often, I will go to that next level as well of really making sure that if you have little letters here, I want to make sure I get the tangents right so that we're not getting any weird intersections between the background foliage and the logo. So yeah, so again, I'm not necessarily doing drawing here, like this is not about me saying, hey, this is good drawing, or look at me drawing leaves. What I'm trying to do is thinking about, like, okay, as we add fidelity here, like what is going to be on what layer? How do we balance that? How do we make it work? That is really the key. Yeah, as we get more sort of used to drawing these different things, I can be a bit more sort of suggestive with kind of how we do it. But again, here it's less about, oh, this is, you know, a really good drawing of a leaf or whatever. It's more a matter of directionality and how do I link up these shapes. And also, as I kind of said in the beginning, we are going to have some of these types of shapes, but underneath this is going to be a lower level on the layers palette anyway of sort of background foliage back here. So yeah, putting that in, figuring out what's in front of what. This is, I mean, let me know in the comments down below. To me, this seems like a pretty sort of mundane kind of stage. This is often one of those stages where, yeah, you can kind of chill out for a bit. We just kind of, you know, it's almost like we're sort of filling in the dots, doing, you know, coloring between the lines, as it were. So this one is in front. This one. And these are in front of this. So yeah, there's so many layers here. But it's actually very easy to fill layers with color. So if I just kind of draw a mess, and I feel like I'm repeating myself here with this basic idea, but I think this is such an important idea when it comes to the line and color process, is if I kind of have a bunch of leaves on a layer, it's very, and you know, and say I have like 5 layers of leaves and they all kind of combine, it's very easy to actually flat that, right? To just add flat color to that and let the parallax and the complexity of the image solve itself. Also, if things are on separate layers, it's very easy to automate some of the processes for filling that with color. Versus if I kind of am a bit lazy and I sort of just have one mass, like if all of this is on one layer, it can be a lot harder to actually go in there and, you know, sort through it all and figure out like, oh, what's on top of what, and then you got to go in there and I'm kind of adding color to individual leaves. I sort of want to avoid doing that to a certain degree. That's like, in my view, that's something that is going to suck up a huge amount of time. I don't really want to do that. So here, I've got a couple of these kind of concepts of overlap. Right, sort of bush here. And this really is the difference, right? It's like how much stuff do we want in there? How much is going to give it that feeling of like, wow, there's a lot of cool bits and pieces going on. Feels really rich, detailed. Again, we'll see how well it succeeds, but often planning like this and just at a very base level, like what goes in front of what's going here, what's going there, what's light, what's dark. If I get all this right, my anticipation, we'll see how we go. Again, stay tuned. But my anticipation is this will kind of all just fall into place once I add the flats, and that in itself really is the kind of the beauty of this entire process. Is we do a lot of kind of futzing around here. We do a lot of work in the beginning, but at the end it's easy because I know what my colors are going to be. I've got a whole bunch of different layers, just a matter of putting it all together, and away we go. few extra. So this will be a blue flower if I can remember to do that. I probably won't. Boom. All right. So yeah, I think that's kind of there. Let's make a new layer just for fun, just because we can, and then we'll use this to do this little pack she's got. See if we can make it feel as if it's something that's been kind of strapped together with some different rope. So yeah, utilizing the layers, making sure you draw progressively. I mean, technically, everything's just on one layer. There's nothing that technically, from a drawing perspective, is really that different about the way that I'm putting things on separate layers. All it does is allows me to go back or delete or move things around. But if I merged all these lines layers onto one, that would be fine. Still want to keep the stuff in the background on its own layer though. All right. Another thing we could do is try and, from a construction point of view, sort of think about how the form is wrapping around these different bits of cloak, because that can be, from my experience, and this is where you always just learn based on your experience of what needs working out for you. But from my experience, I'm often sort of spending a little bit too much time figuring out what goes where, because I haven't fully sorted out the folds here. Again, this might be similar here. Right, once we've got this, I know we kind of didn't really get that sorted. So what I might do is go back here. Let's really see if we can sort this out. Because I also don't think I sorted this out. Right, where this goes over here. So everything's kind of meeting in the middle. Got this giant brooch thing. But this is kind of draping over here. It goes down, right? If we were to draw through, here it's coming up, and it's wrapping over here, and then it's going to be bunching up. So I feel like something maybe a bit more like that might work. Again, it doesn't, I feel like if you imagine that on your arm, I think probably what would happen is like this would slip off and it would just kind of fall there, but maybe it'll be enough for the moment. All right, so we've got this, got this. I don't know whether that's going to work. We'll have a go. And this is where, again, I'm not sure about it. I'm not sure how much time we got. Let's go in there. Let's figure it out. Again, this hand, for a cover, it's probably not good enough. Let's also see if we can put some little claws on that bird. Again, not anatomically anything, but we'll see how we go. Alright, so we got thumb, right, ball of the thumb, then we got the main bit of the thumb there. Right, that's going down. Got right, got a hand here. And this is the other finger under there. I feel like some rings and things would be cool. It doesn't make much sense with, normally people have like a glove. But, Now, which way is that? Which way is that arm going? It's kind of got to be going a bit this way, doesn't it? So it's coming at us, if we were to think about where the cylinder of that is. Right, cylinder, and let's make sure we get the tangents right with the stuff in the background. So again, these are all the little details that will make a difference, right? I've got one bracelet's going here, right? Then I've got this fold going over here. So I was going to put a bracelet here, but it's going to start to intersect with this. So let's move it up, all right? And then, if we were to have another one, it's going to be under here. Now this also means that probably I should draw these fingers. Will I regret drawing these fingers? I don't know. But I think I've got to put them in. Something like that. I think that should be okay. Maybe I can probably wing those fingers. Again, if you can't, go in there, refine, refine, refine. Now, is this bicep too big? Is this too chunky? Yeah, it looks pretty chunky, but I'm actually imagining that the character has, doesn't have, sub 20% body fat. So I'm drawing the bicep in there, but I'll probably only indicate it as I actually sort of draw it. Yeah, anyway, so that's probably done in terms of the construction drawing. Now, one of the things I do notice is I sort of had planned for some of this grass here to sort of overlap. And I still think that is a good idea because it will give us plenty of parallax, right? The more I can work this kind of thing in, right? We've got overlap, the better. But what I do have here is a foot that is a little bit more exposed. So let's try and see if we can do less of an average job drawing that foot. So I'm going to draw the heel, right? That comes down there, and then we're going to draw the ball of the foot. Then I'm going to draw the big toe. Let's have this really kind of hook out, just sort of push the shapes. Right, ball of the foot, big toe, more toes, and that'll probably do. Now again, let's watch our tangents. Let's see if we can put something right to create a little bit of interest just here. Well, micro composition, making sure we watch our tangents, and we'll also put some things here. Now this is where again we start to look a little bit closer and kind of realize like, oh yeah, I haven't actually figured out what's happening with these knees. All right, same thing here. So I've got very sort of cartoony knees. What? Photoshop has done that version thing again. Let's make a new. Come on. There we go. Boom. All right. So I think that's probably as much as we need to do or kind of want to do. I think the last thing I was this was sort of bothering me before, but yeah, you know, I really feel like these things are just too big. So I'm just gonna see if making them a little bit bigger kind of works. So just setting the transform point, you know, kind of where I had that little center line that I'd kind of drawn for them. But yeah, I think something a little bit smaller is gonna look slightly more stylish. Anyway, I think we are done with construction, so probably about an hour and a half. You know, probably it would have been a little bit less if I was, you know, sort of really going full tilt, not talking. You know, which I think is like a good amount of time to spend on this type of, you know, sort of cover style illustration. If it needed a bit more detail, I'd put a little bit more detail. If I could, you know, get away with some of it, I would probably get away with a little bit less, but I think this will allow us to take this to the next stage and again, you know, get to a pretty good level of finish when we do our finished lines. All right, that's all I've got for part 2 of this tutorial series, and hopefully, you know, these ideas about the construction phase have been sort of helpful for you. Hopefully you've seen how you can sort of maybe apply these in your own drawing. I can't recommend, you know, sort of expanding on the construction phase of your drawing, even having multiple sort of stages here where you really focus on primary form, secondary form, tertiary form, you know, really make this a major part of your process, and it will improve 2 things. It will improve your overall sort of quality of the illustration you're working on, and it will also give you a way to build your skills at the same time in a really practical, applied way. It's so important to understand that if you're learning anatomy, you kind of need to learn how to apply it doing the things that you're actually doing, and, you know, expanding the construction phase of your process really allows you to do this. So let me know if that makes sense in the comment down below. Send me an email at tim@thedrawingcodex.com. What we got up next is the finished lines. No surprise, but I've got some, you know, things that I think are really sort of interesting to look at when it comes to the psychology of line work and kind of how it relates to what we do as people who draw in a comic book style. So hopefully you'll check that out. When I've got that up, you'll be able to check it out here. Other than that, I'll see you in the comments down below. Happy drawing.